1904, and he was looking for work. It was the midst of the Depression. He and his wife had a paid-for Chevrolet, and about $5 between the two of them, and he was looking to get hired on. He didn't have anything to work up there. He didn't have a pair of boots. He didn't have the tools he needed. He borrowed both. And he ended up working along with the hardy Scandinavians who were going up into the forest, cutting down the trees, turning them into railroad ties. And he joined in that work. He'd go up, he'd find a good tree, he'd cut it down, he'd shape it, he'd cut it to size, he'd put it up on his shoulder, drag it on down to the railroad, drop it off, go back and get another one. He got a nickel a tree. In no time at all, he's making $1 a day. But he didn't want to be cutting down trees his whole life. He had a vision. He had a part of the American dream. He dreamed of a time that maybe he'd be able to build right there on that very spot and build. Because, the Forest Service back in the day was in the business of cutting down trees. It was a renewable crop. And they had planned out that very spot on Fox Park that there'd be an industrial park there. And over time, Melvin Grant and his wife and his partner built the mill, and they built more than a mill. They built a town. They built the little town of Fox Park. And they put through about 6 million board feet of timber a year through that mill. His boy, Marvin, grew up, went off to college, didn't like college very much, came back, working in his dad's mill. And then sadly, during the 80s, the economy turned south, and the Forest Service decided to stop cutting down trees, turn them over to the pine beetle. I heard the other day the Forest Service does have a plan for getting rid of the pine beetle. It's going to let it eat all the trees, and then the pine beetle will die out for lack of food supply. But Marvin found one thing that he'd never lose. The thing he'd never lose that mill. And sadly, with the loss of that mill, the railroad came in and tore up its tracks, abandoned the right-of-way, it pulled off the ties, it pulled off the tracks, and abandoned the rail line. But his dad had been far-sighted. His dad was far-sighted enough to realize that he'd built an entire town. He'd built his mill, he'd built his home, he'd built his community on federal land. And he knew that couldn't be sustained, so he'd gone to the Forest Service years before, and he said, hey, I've got this 63 acres here that I'd like to purchase from the Forest Service. The Forest Service says, well, we're not in the business of selling. And he said, well, what do you want? And the Forest Service said, well, if you want to buy up some acres that we covet, we'll trade for it. And so that's what he did. He bought up 220 acres the Forest Service wanted, and he traded them for it. He got something pretty precious. We talked about this afternoon. He got a patent from the federal government. He got a patent from the United States government. You can't have a better title than a patent from the federal government. It had one proviso in it. It had one qualification in it. The qualification said that grant of land, that 63 acres, was granted subject to a railroad right-of-way. Well, Mr. Grant knew that, of course, and the railroad went right through their services mill. And so after he died, and after the mill ended its service, and after the railroad pulled up tracks and went away, Marvin Grant sat there knowing that he'd got to hold on to that land that his dad had given him. And then one day, he got a call from the Forest Service. The Forest Service had decided it was going to make a bicycle trail out of that old abandoned railroad right-of-way. And Marvin was a little perplexed. After all, it's 9,000-foot elevation there. They get snow beginning in late September, early October, and lasts through May and early June. And moreover, it's a national forest, and all those trees up and down that railroad right-of-way were coming back up out of the ground, and not a very welcome place to ride a bicycle. And Marvin expressed some doubts to the Forest Service. The Forest Service said, no, we did a study. We had an expert do a study, and we think 200,000 people will come every year to ride on this bike path. typical Forest Service study. I don't think 220,000 people go a year, every year to learn, let alone to ride a bike. So Marvin said, well, you've got a bigger problem than that. The problem is I own that land and I'm not going to sell it. And the Forest Service agent said, well, we don't want you to sell it. We're going to take it from you. You got it. We want it. We're going to get it. And if we have to take it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, we're going to get it. And that's what Marvin told me. And he said, Perry, I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford to defend myself. But I'm fighting against the United States government, and the state of Wyoming's behind them, and all these green groups they want my property, and can you help me? And we did. So when the Forest Service filed the quiet title action against him to take his property, we responded with a counterclaim. That was 2006. And over the next 8 years, we litigated in 5 different courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States. We argued that case back on January the 17th, 2014, and in record time, I think the Supreme Court of the United States issued a ruling on the 10th of March, 8-1 in our favor. And what the Supreme Court of the United States said in its opinion was that back in 1932, the United States government had come into federal court and taken our position. And now, all these years later, they're coming in court and taking an opposite position. As Justice Scalia said to the attorney arguing the case, so you're telling us that when you came in before, that easement should be one thing, and now you're coming in later and you want the easement to be something else again. Whatever benefits the United States the most. Justice Scalia wasn't alone. Justice Stephen Breyer said, why any lawyer worth his salt understands that this railroad right-of-way reverted to Mr. Brand. Justice Kagan, no friend of ours typically, she said, why the government doesn't understand that this thing goes to Mr. Brown is a mystery. Mr. Brandt is a mystery to me. You're probably wondering, with an opinion like that written by the Chief Justice, an 8-1 opinion, you're probably wondering who was the dissent. The dissent was written by Justice Sotomayor. It went something like this. Trails are good. People like trails. But if we have to pay Mr. Brandt millions of dollars, that would be bad. Well, I paraphrase. But that was the nature of the case, and we got our land back, and our client got his land back. And I got to tell you that the only reason that happened was because Mountain States Legal Foundation was available to represent Mr. Marvin Brandt. And the tragic thing about it, as far as I'm concerned, as an attorney, and as someone who believes attorneys have an ethical responsibility, is the fact that the federal government should never have taken that case. Because it had won a case just like ours, taking our position. And now, to benefit itself, it was taking a totally opposite opinion. Several years ago, I was approached by a man in rural New York, in upstate New York, a little town called Fenton, in a county called Broome County. And Mr. Carter, a very interesting guy, 6 generations on the land. When you go back and read the records of his town, about how the town started, one of the people at that very first meeting when the town started was a guy named Clark. So one of his ancestors was there at the beginning of the town. And Mr. Clark, he has about 250 acres. He runs about 50 head of cattle. He has a small trucking company. He does what many people in rural America do. They have multiple jobs to keep body and soul together. A few years ago, a miracle happened. I remember Jimmy Carter, back in his time in public office, said that by 1990 we'd run out of natural gas. I remember attending a legal conference several years ago, and I was told we'd already hit peak oil. We had produced as much oil as we were ever going to produce, and it was going downhill from there. But that's not what happened, is it? We have a lot today, a lot of energy, because of the marvelous resource that is the human brain. and human ingenuity, technology. And every generation, so it seems, leaves the next generation with more resources and more things to use in better ways and more efficiently than the previous generation. And so it was with this thing we call hydraulic fracturing. It is an economic miracle, it is an energy miracle, and in the transition away from some fossil fuels, it is an environmental miracle. And Mr. Clark in upstate New York wanted a piece of that miracle. And all he had to do was look across the border into Pennsylvania, where this amazing thing was happening. Farms were being able to be revitalized. They had new equipment. They had new barns. They were able to bring the kids back from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, where they had gone and left the family, come back onto the farm and return people to the land, all because of Marcellus Shale. In fact, 13 of the top gas-producing wells in all of Pennsylvania are in a little tiny county called Susquehanna County. If you wonder where Susquehanna County is, well, it's just south of my client's property in Broome County, New York. And so what my client wanted to do was he wanted to do what they were doing in Pennsylvania. He wanted to drill on his property because he thought there was something there. And certainly there was. He got an energy company come in and enter into a lease with him. The tragic thing is that Mr. Clark was not able to drill. He was not able to drill because Governor Cuomo of New York had put in a moratorium on energy drilling, hydraulic fracturing in the state of New York, and so we represented Mr. Clark and filed a lawsuit against the governor. I want to tell you how crazy it was. Jonathan Clark was working in the oil and gas industry. But he wasn't working in New York. He wasn't working on his farm. He wasn't working near his 4 kids and his 6 grandkids. He was working in Oklahoma, in Colorado, and Illinois because of the confiscatory taxes in the state of New York and the mortgage on his land.